The Lord be with you. And with your spirit. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary of Magdala. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple who he loved, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her as his own. After this, aware that everything was now finished, in order that Scripture might be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I thirst." There was a vessel filled with common wine, so they put a sponge soaked in wine on a sprig of hyssop to his mouth. When Jesus had taken the wine, he said, "It is finished," and bowed his head and handed over his spirit. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. So in this class, I want to cover Mary as the new Ruth. But before I get into Mary as new Ruth, I wanted to cover a couple other things, just so we make sure I hit this. One is, yes, Catholics believe in the perpetual virginity of Mary. Many Protestants don't. But I don't know if I mentioned it, but Mary's response to the angel Gabriel, that the angel Gabriel said that she'll bear a son, she said, "How can this be, since I do not know man?" And the point being is that what would be shocking if an angel appeared to you on before your wedding and said that you're going to bear, like Linda, didn't you have an angel appear to you? And said that you're going to have a son? The fact that you're going to have a son wouldn't be shocking. And now, sometimes, sometimes you hear priests or people say that Mary was an unwed mother. That's actually not true. Just weddings took a different form. They were married. That's why Joseph has to divorce her. But they hadn't consummated the marriage yet. That's the last act. Most women getting married would expect to become a mother. It wouldn't be shocking unless you're a consecrated virgin. And since she only asks, how can this be? How could this happen if she only intended on remaining a virgin? Because she says that she does not know man. After that, the angel says you'll be overshadowed by the Holy Spirit. So does that make sense? But that gets into the question of consecrated virgins. Were there consecrated virgins in Judea at the time of Christ? And the answer is yes. And even in the Bible, first of all, the book of Numbers, and I know that's Linda's favorite book. The book of Numbers has a whole chapter on making vows of virginity by women. And there's a section on women who wanted to be virgins and married. So you could take a vow of virginity and get married. The book of Numbers mentions that the vow of virginity belongs to three types of women: virgins, widows, and married women. There are also temporary vows of virginity. But the odd part about this is that historically, Josephus writes us that oblates of the Essene community are the ones who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's actually oblates, lay people, men and women, who would take vows of celibacy, virginity. And there were women who connected with the Essene community that would take vows of virginity. And it's not known for sure. However, if you go over the archaeological evidence, it is pretty shocking, the parallels between Mary and Joseph and the Essene community. They always lived or went to a place where there was an Essene community. Jesus goes to Bethel. That's a place of an Essene community where they cared for the poor. Some of Mary's language is similar to an Essene community. So a lot of biblical scholars think that, maybe Mary was a consecrated virgin of an Essene community. And, okay, did I lose anybody there before I continue? Okay. And secondly, the Gospel of Matthew Matthew mentions that Joseph didn't have relations with Mary. But then third, you have that comment about the brothers of Jesus, the brothers and sisters of Jesus. If Mary was a consecrated virgin, then why does it mention brothers and sisters of Mary? And the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Matthew mentions it, gives the answer, that the brothers and sisters was from another mother named Mary, which means Joseph, they would have been children of Joseph from a previous marriage. Now, that sounds strange, but in the Essene community, if you're a consecrated virgin and you'd get married to an older man who was a widow. Does that make sense? Also, in Hebrew, there's no word for step-brother. You just use brothers. Also, and this is very important, the word brothers or sisters, it could just be denoted to any extended family. So in the Old Testament, there's several examples of somebody calling somebody their brother, but technically they're like a second cousin or some part of an extended family. So I think that's kind of interesting. But also in this ancient writing, it mentions the bishops, and it mentions James and Jude and it uses the Greek word for cousin of Jesus. So when it says brothers, it could mean cousin. And brothers and sisters could just mean extended family. The other thing is Mary's birth pangs. So just to make the class easier, I wanted to cover that too. But first, I should stop. Does that make sense, what I said about the consecrated virgin, or anybody totally lost on virginity? Good. Oh, we got a question.
So Joseph married her then, knowing she was a consecrated virgin?
Yes, and it does say in the book of Numbers that if a man marries a woman who is a consecrated virgin, it has this thing. So that actually was not uncommon either.
Are the Essene communities like communes of people
Yes.
of like mind?
Communes of a priestly class who lived outside of Jerusalem. The temple priests they considered completely corrupt, and they were.
James and John, they were Jesus' cousins?
Well, I don't know. This other document uses the word cousin, yes.
Or stepbrothers?
Or stepbrothers. But this other document lists them as cousins, which is just kind of interesting. So were they stepbrothers or cousins? I'll find out when I get to heaven. Give me 40 years. I'll be right there.
Walking on the beach and he calls them away from their father, right? And they come automatically, but they're his cousin?
Yeah. I don't know. We'll find out. But think about this. Like, they had huge families. So maybe, even John the Baptist, that would have been a second cousin. Doesn't mean they know him that well. I don't even know who my second cousins are. All right, so now the birth pangs. This will make sense in a minute, I hope. But first, in the Old Testament, there's prophecies about the mother of the Messiah. In Isaiah, in chapter 66, that prophecy mentions the mother of Messiah. But before chapter 66, in chapter 65, it talks about this new creation that will come. When the Messiah comes, there'll be this new creation, and the effects of the fall will start to be undone. And the effects of the fall are birth pangs while giving birth and fruitless toil. So then in chapter 66, it mentions that the mother of the Messiah will not have childbirth pains. So the prophecy of no labor pains is a sign of the new creation coming. So then after that, about mentioning no childbirth pangs of labor, it then mentions this really ambiguous prophecy that the mother of the Messiah will not have labor pains at his birth, but will have labor pains when she gives birth to a multiple of children in the city of Zion. So what is that about? And then it says, her king will be revealed. Well, so one more, Micah, in Micah 5, it does mention that the Messiah will be born in the city of Bethlehem, from ancient eternity. And then speaks about the people of God will come into the kingdom when the mother of the Messiah is in labor, that God will give them up when she who is in travail has brought forth. So our position is Mary was not in labor at Christ's birth, but she was in labor at the cross. It's through the cross and resurrection where the sons and daughters come into the kingdom. So there's other kind of interesting other biblical writings before Christ saying that some people, when they're talking about the coming of the Messiah, they wanted to be born afterwards so that they wouldn't feel the labor pains of the new kingdom. Well, the labor pains, in case you missed it, it's the cross. So does that make sense, or did I lose anybody? That's where her heart is broken when her son is dying. And in the book of Revelation, the woman clothed with a son, if you look at it, it mentions that she's in pain at giving birth. And when you first look at it, you kind of think, oh yeah, that means Bethlehem. But the word description for labor pangs of the mother is not childbirth pains, but the word that's used is really torture or tribulations. It's suffering on the cross. So it's the same word of Christ suffering on the cross that is used in the book of Revelation when she is giving birth. So that image of the woman clothed with a son, when she's in pain giving birth, it's actually the crucifixion. And think about this. When Jesus is doing his ministry, before his crucifixion, he speaks about his coming death and uses his death as an example of a woman giving birth as painful and sorrowful, the hour of the birth. But then there's joy. So he compares his hour of death, because he literally will say, this is my hour when he's being crucified, as a type of birth pang for the new kingdom. So Mary had her birth pangs at the cross. So when Christ, and at the cross, Jesus says, this is my hour. And at the cross, he mentions his hour, and then he adopts Mary to the church. So if you're reading these prophecies, I wanted to clear that up. When it mentions the child, the labor pains of the mother, it means the cross. So just wanted to get that in before Rachel. Otherwise, when you talk about suffering, you might think it's about giving birth. It's about giving birth to the kingdom at the death and resurrection of Christ. Once again, want to ask, confusion? Because the Italians look a little lost, and we're...
You better watch out.
I'll be running after Mass, or after this class. Okay, so now, that being cleared, I want to cover the image, the typology of Mary as a new Rachel. And so I put sheets down at your table noting the typology of Joseph and Jesus. I just did that because some people try and take notes, and it's like, after like so many of them, you're like, what? Now I missed that. What was that third one? So you don't have to keep them, but just so you can go along. Remember a typology. What's in the Old Testament is foreshadowed in the New Testament. So in the Old Testament, you have all these typology. So just about Christ. Christ is the new Adam. Christ is Jacob. Christ is Joseph. Christ is the new Moses. Christ is David. You have all of them. You have typology about the Eucharist. You have this foreshadowing of what the Eucharist means over and over again in the Old Testament. I love that stuff. The Lechem HaPanim, the Passover meal, the bread from heaven, all those explain. Make sense? You even have it about, and I love this one, trees. That's actually a really, really, really common one, is trees in the Old Testament and how they work. Every major figure has a tree. But the tree is a tree of life. And what the Christ on the cross, that's a tree. So you have all these foreshadowings. And we call those typologies. So look at the Joseph typology. Joseph is kind of a prefigurement of Christ. First, Joseph is the firstborn son of Rachel and the beloved son of Jacob. Jesus is the firstborn son of Mary and the beloved Son of God. Joseph is sold to the Gentiles for 20 silver pieces by Judah, one of the 12 brothers. Jesus is sold to the Gentiles for 30 pieces of silver by Judas, one of the 12 apostles. Joseph is with two condemned men, the cupbearer and the baker, one who is pardoned and given physical life, the other one dies. Jesus is with two condemned prisoners, one who is forgiven by Jesus and gains everlasting life, and the other one dies. Joseph is 30 years old when he enters Pharaoh's service. Jesus is 30 years old when he begins his ministry. I forgot to write this one down. When the brothers meet Joseph, he's 33. When Christ dies, he's 33. Joseph is exalted to the right hand of Pharaoh and rules over the kingdom of Egypt. Jesus is exalted at the right hand of God and rules over the kingdom of heaven and earth. Joseph feeds the world with grain. Remember the dream he stockpiled. Jesus feeds the world with bread and life. Joseph gives special honor to Benjamin, the youngest of the 12, at a banquet. Jesus gives special honor to the beloved disciple at the Last Supper. Joseph is revealed to his brothers, who did not recognize him at first, after he is exalted to the throne of Egypt. Jesus is revealed to his disciples, who don't recognize him at first, after he's raised from the dead. Joseph says his death is how he saved the entire family. Jesus' death is how he saves the family of mankind. Joseph is given a technicolored coat, and the high priest would wear this technicolored coat, this multicolored coat. Jesus is the high priest. So somebody else mentioned this, where they've never heard this thing about typology. It was very, very common in the early church. The early church, they picked up all this stuff because they're Jewish. And they realized, oh, this is a story of Jesus. Does that make sense? So did I lose anybody in the typology? It is kind of amazing. If you look at it, whether it's Moses or David, you have all these hints that Jesus is the new Joseph or David. So, but the question is this. If it's clear that went too far. If it's clear that Jesus is the new Joseph, then that raises a question about Joseph's mother, Rachel. Who is the new Rachel? So, in case you don't know, I want to give the backstory of Rachel. Rachel, and the name in Hebrew means female sheep or ewe. She was a beloved disciple of Jacob. Remember, Jacob is this trickster. He sees this beautiful woman and he falls in love. And that actually changes his life from being selfish to a good person. But he always loved Rachel the most. He did marry, he got tricked into marrying the sister, but it's kind of sad because he didn't really love the sister. And if you read the whole story, Leah knows that she's not loved, but that she does have children. Rachel, she does have the love of Jacob. It's this heartbreaking story. She has the love of Jacob, but what she really wants is the love of a child. And that she doesn't have. But then she does have Joseph, and then later Benjamin. She was beautiful. But Rachel's life was filled with a lot of suffering. She did have 2 children. Jacob was the firstborn. But Rachel dies giving birth to Benjamin, the 12th son of Jacob. He's the only full brother of Joseph. Rachel gives the name, Benjamin, gives him the name son of my sorrow, Benoni. But Jacob changes his name to something more positive. In Hebrew, it's Benjamin, or Benjamin, son of my right hand. So notice that Rachel, and this is a really odd part, Rachel, when she dies giving birth to Benjamin, she's not buried with the other mothers of Israel. Sarah, Rebecca, they're all buried in this family tomb. Instead, she's buried on a road near Bethlehem. So it's intriguing because the author of Genesis makes it clear that the location of the tomb is known to that day, that they knew where Rachel was born. And Rachel was called the mother of all Israel. Now, technically, she was the mother of only 2 sons, but the Jews over and over will call Rachel the mother of all Israel. And later, Jeremiah depicts Rachel as weeping for, quote unquote, her children who have been killed and driven out of the promised land during exile. So what it says is this: "Thus says the Lord, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentations and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are not." Now, that's in Jeremiah. That's going to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years after Rachel dies. So think how odd this is. Jeremiah depicts Rachel as still living, even though she's died hundreds of years ago, that she's witnessing the suffering of her descendants and acts kind of like a classic mother who mourns and intercedes for her children. And God says to Rachel not to cry anymore because her work will be rewarded. Her children will come back to the promised land. So the reason why Jacob buries Rachel in that particular plot of land instead of where all the mothers are buried is, it says, this is from this Jewish writing, Jacob foresaw the exiles would pass on from there. He buried her so that she might pray for them. So the odd thing that happens, that hundreds of years later after Rachel dies, she's buried in Bethlehem, which is a strange place for a matriarch to be buried. And hundreds of years later, when the Babylonians come in and conquer the country, they all pass by Rachel's tomb. And Jeremiah prophesies that she'll be praying for them, that she's a sign, passing by her tomb is a sign of hope that they will return. Now, what's odd about that? That's the first hint of a promise of an afterlife. How could Rachel be praying for him if she's dead? Do you see what I mean? So in Judaism, Rachel is, in Jewish tradition, the most powerful intercessor that you have to pray for. Rachel's tomb in the city of Bethlehem was preserved in Jewish writings to the 1st century. Jews, Christians, Muslims all regarded the traditional site of Rachel's buried near Bethlehem as a holy place of prayer. And even in the 12th century, we have records of Jews visiting Rachel's tomb and lighting candles, asking her to pray for them. Rachel is depicted as the matriarch of the people, the most powerful intercessor. And so there's just one example in the Mishnah of Abraham and Moses coming to God weeping because of the destruction of the people during the exile. Moses and the prophet pray for them, but when Rachel comes with her tears, God listened to her tears. So the story is just a story that Rachel's prayers and tears are the most powerful. So she's if I ask you, who's the mother of Israel? Rachel. Who's the most powerful intercessor in Israel? Rachel. And here's the shocking part. Mary is going to be depicted as this new Rachel. So the first and most explicit connection of Rachel in the Old Testament, in Mary in the New Testament, is King Herod's massacre of the children in Bethlehem. It's kind of first and foremost because when you hear of that crying out, that's what you think, that the children were massacred in the vicinity of Rachel's tomb. And just as Rachel was buried on the road of Bethlehem, so the children of Herod were slaughtered there and the surrounding regions. Also, Rachel dies, and she's somehow aware of the suffering of her descendants, and she laments for them. That's why in the gospel, Matthew quotes Rachel crying at the suffering of the children being slaughtered in Bethlehem. Also, they're suffering for both their children. Rachel and Mary are counterparts to each other. Rachel is a suffering mother, but Mary is going to be a suffering mother as well. In the book of Revelation, the woman clothed with the sun, moon, and stars, to understand what that image is, it's pretty easy. But you have to go back to Jacob. Joseph. Remember, Joseph has this dream? And Joseph has this dream of his brothers being like stars, and they'll bow down to him. And then his mother and the moon and the sun bow down to him. And when he tells Jacob the story, Jacob says, "Son, why would your mother and I bow down to you?" So if the 12 stars are the brothers, who's the sun and the moon? Okay, you get an extra donut. Jacob is the sun and his mother is the moon. So Rachel's symbol was the moon. Does that make sense? Okay, so the sun is the father. The moon is Rachel. The 12 stars are the 12 brothers. So now look at the woman clothed with the sun in the book of Revelation. She's standing on a moon, which means the woman is superior to Rachel, or new Rachel, but clothed with the Father, the Son. Do you get the image? It means that she, standing on the moon, means she's the new Rachel. Pretty clear, right? The other one is, if you notice, Rachel and the woman are both in hard labor in the book of Revelation. Rachel cries out with pain. The woman cries out with pain. And that phrase, crying out in labor, quote unquote, there's only 2 places that happens in the Bible. One with Rachel, the other one in the book of Revelation with the woman giving birth. It's kind of a hint. Mary's the new Rachel. Also, this is the bizarre part. If you read the book of Revelation, the woman clothed with the sun does give birth to a son who's the Messiah, but she also has other children. John is very explicit about this because it says, "The dragon was angry with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her offspring on those who kept the commandment of God and bear testimony to Jesus." Who's the other children of the woman? Us, yeah. Like, technically, not all Jews are related to Rachel, but Rachel is considered their mother. Mary is considered our mother. And just as Rachel was regarded as a special way of the mother of all persecuted children in the Old Testament, so the heavenly woman clothed with a son is a mother of all of those who believe in Jesus. Third, the mother of Jesus and the beloved disciple. Mary is being depicted as the new Rachel in the Gospel of John because she becomes the mother of the beloved disciple through the cross. So it says, so soldiers did this. But standing by the cross of Jesus was his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Jesus saw his mother, whom he loved, standing near, and he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the beloved disciple, "Behold your mother." From that hour, the disciple took her as his own. So just as Rachel gave birth to a second son, Benjamin, through her suffering and death of childbirth, so Mary spiritually gives birth to a second son, the beloved disciple, through her interior dying with Christ on the cross. So it's kind of important to remember that the prophet Simeon described Mary's future suffering at the cross. Remember when she's at the temple and he comes up and he says that her soul will be pierced with a sword? In other words, a spiritual death. Benjamin, the son of Rachel, is identified not just as the younger son of Joseph, but quote unquote, the beloved son. So of Benjamin it says, the beloved of the Lord. He dwells in safety by him. He encompasses all day long and makes his dwelling place between his shoulders. So just as Benjamin is called the beloved of the Lord, John's name is never really used in the Gospel of John. He keeps being referred to as the beloved disciple. There's two reasons. But one reason is he kept using that because he's underscoring this idea that Mary is the new Rachel. If he's the new beloved, then the mother is Mary. So think about this typology. Just as Joseph is the firstborn of Rachel, Jesus is the firstborn of Mary. Benjamin is a son of Rachel's sorrow. John, the beloved disciple, is the son of Mary's sorrow. There's 12 sons, but Benjamin is the beloved. There's 12 apostles, but John is the beloved. So you have all these images, I love them, of Mary being the new Rachel. Okay, questions, objections, confusion. Lori has her eyes. Okay.
Rachel's sorrow then is her death? Is that what her death?
Well, it's multiple things. Rachel's sorrow is her death. Rachel's sorrow is hundreds of years later when they go into exile and the Jews are killed. Rachel's sorrow is also when the infants were massacred by Herod. Okay, Lori, did you understand? Because you're giving me that look.
Didn't you also say that Mary's second birth is the church
Yes.
instead of just Joseph? John.
Right.
So is John like important in the church? He's the beloved.
Well, it never says.
Does he establish, the formation of the church like with the Pope and everything?
No. That'd be Peter who'd be Pope, but it doesn't, why be ambiguous about saying John the Beloved? Why don't you say John? It does two things.
Right.
One, you figure out, it's obvious. John is a beloved disciple. The other part is, who else is a beloved disciple?
Us.
Right. We're all the beloved disciple. It's a image of us in the future. And if we're all the beloved disciple, then Mary is our mother. So, good job. Clear, unclear?
Unclear.
Okay, what's unclear?
Well, has this typology ever been done before in a book or written, or did you get this out of?
Oh no, the early Christians noted all these typologies of trees, Eucharist, Mary, Jesus. All the sacraments have typologies in the Old Testament. Everything is, there's...
Well, maybe I'm obtuse, but I don't know what that word means. But
You're more than 90 degrees? Okay, go ahead.
not 90 yet. But to me, it seems like the Blessed Mother's holiness and she's standing on the earth in that serpent's cup. I have those kind of pictures, not Rachel in the new.
Well, you can have that image, but if it also means she's the new Rachel is what that imagery also means. Somebody over there had their hand up? Yeah.
Rachel experienced sorrow after she died. She was along the road. I didn't think we experienced sorrow after we died.
Yeah, that is a really interesting one, isn't it? I know. I don't know. I would say in the resurrection, no. But the Jews did believe in the resurrection as the Bible goes on. But the problem is, where was Rachel at this time? She wasn't resurrected. So the Jews said, well, if the resurrection is going to happen when the Christ comes, what about Rachel and the patriarchs? Where are they? Because they're dead, but they're not completely dead. You get that in the Bible, right? So they came up with this term called Sheol. Okay, Sheol is the place of the dead, the waiting for the Messiah to come. But they're dead. They're not completely dead, but they're just in this waiting room before the Messiah comes. What's that? That's not purgatory, because Yeah, purgatory would mean you're going into heaven.
Would it be the cry room?
It's kind of the cry room. No, it's a mental construct. And the idea was when the Messiah comes, he's going to resurrect all the dead, starting with Adam and Eve, clear up to the future. That the resurrection is called a trans-historical event. So when Christ is resurrected, since he's outside of time, he can go back and get Adam and Eve and Rachel. I know it's a little complicated, so sorry about that.
So the Jews are still then
Waiting for the Messiah to come.
They still believe people are just hanging out in Sheol.
Yeah.
Okay.
So actually in the creed, when we say Christ descended into hell, it doesn't say hell. What it says is Sheol. But Sheol is kind of a hard concept to get, that Christ descended to where all the dead are, in every time period and place. Okay, did I completely lose that on? Okay. Mary Ellen.
So the Jews believed that when the Messiah came, there would be a resurrection
Of the dead.
of the dead. I didn't know that.
So that the problem is it's not really mentioned. It's hinted in the Old Testament, but the more you get to the later books, you get like Maccabees speaks about the resurrection, right? Wisdom speaks about resurrection. So we use the Bible, the Old Testament. I just got coffee all over your nice purse. Yeah, get that away from you. So when, what was I going to talk about before resurrection. So like in the Old Testament, you have like the Book of Wisdom mentioning resurrection, Maccabees. So after the church gets started, there's this supposed council of Pharisees, and they get together and they take out of the Old Testament those books that speak about the resurrection. So the Old Testament that we use have references to the resurrection. The later Old Testament doesn't, because they took those books out. Does that make sense? So, and it's kind of odd because you've heard about the celebration of Hanukkah. Hanukkah is in Maccabees. That doesn't exist in the Jewish book anymore. And Luther, when Luther breaks away from the Catholic Church, he wants to make things different. So he uses the Old Testament that had lesser books, references to the resurrection. So, does that make sense? So.
So I have two questions. So earlier, the Jews did believe that Jesus was resurrected, but they didn't believe he was the Messiah.
No.
But you said they really came back to life.
The Jews at the time, let's say just before Christ, they believed that the Christ was going to bring the resurrection. That's why Martha says, "Oh, I know they'll be resurrected when the Messiah comes." But, so they did believe that, yeah.
Oh, okay, but so I misinterpreted. So they didn't believe that he came back alive at any point.
Who?
That Jesus came back. The Jews don't believe that.
Today, no. But they did believe the prophecies. They don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. But they did believe that the Messiah would bring the resurrection.
Got it. And then number 9, it says Joseph says his death is how he saved the entire family. I thought we didn't know how Joseph died.
No, okay, that's right. But his death is when he's thrown into the pit. His death is when he's thrown, sold. That's his death. Does that make sense? He's left for dead. And then he's sold. And that's by death, I mean that.
So do you have any idea why the woman of the sun is in exile for 1,260 days?
I don't know, but I can guess. So all numbers mean something, and that's 3.5 years. It should be 3.5 years. every time the number 3.5, whether it's in days or months, but equals 3.5 years, that's a time of trial. So like 7 means covenant. God keeps using the same symbols over and over, so it gets really easy. 12 means the people of God. 7 means covenant, commitment. 3.5 means a time of trial. So you could say, oh, like our life on earth is 3.5 years. It's a time of trial. 1,000 is like the number bazillion. So if it says 1,000 years, anytime it says 1,000, it just means an endless amount of time. Yes, Maxine.
Do we believe that Sheol still
Sheol, no, because Christ is resurrected.
Jewish?
That was the concept of, well, because people had to say, well, okay, Christ will come and resurrect the dead, but where are the dead now? And that's where they just came up with a mental construct of Sheol. So we'd say, well, Sheol doesn't exist anymore because Christ is resurrected.
Why do you think that the church or whoever with that version of the creed uses the word hell then? That's confused me since I was a kindergartner.
Yeah, hell would be confusing, but I think Sheol would be more confusing. Because it's the best word that we have. And every translation is a traitor.
It's really wrong though. I mean, it seems like, so now he's going to go down there, so what was, or if it's down, but what was the purpose of that?
Yeah, hell doesn't make any sense, yeah. But that's because you're thinking logically. And you're right, you're 100% right. But if we wrote Sheol, then everybody would be like, now what's Sheol? Yeah.
So do the Jews right now still believe in Sheol? Because he hasn't come yet.
I don't know. I don't know what the Jews believe right now.
Yeah, they do. I've had neighbors that were Jews and they told me that story.
They still believe in Sheol?
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yes. Blue hat.
What?
I said blue hat.
So, in the mystical city of God, it does address that. And it says that after Jesus died, he did go during, I don't know which of the 3 days, he did go there to release all those that were being held. I want to say, I thought the word was prison or something, but it was like they were in kind of a captivity. And then once he was resurrected, he went to visit them. And it does line up with Scripture because Scripture says people saw people walking around that were resurrected. If
Yes.
you remember that verse. So, I mean, it totally
In Matthew.
unlocks that whole mystery of where were they, and then they were released.
But it's...
There's probably no reason to have that place anymore.
no, there's no reason.
Now it's done.
Yeah.
But all those in the Old Testament, the patriarchs or whatever, they had to wait.
Right.
And then they got released.
Does she mean that when we die, if we don't go to purgatory?
Well, if you die, you're going to go to purgatory. But if you go to purgatory, you're going to go to heaven. So if you die, you either go to hell or heaven.
Okay, so the ones, well, Jesus doesn't want anyone really to go to hell, but that's too, I can't comprehend all that. So, but they have to wait.
No more waiting. No, it's
Go to hell right now?
it's either heaven or hell. No more Sheol. Okay, back to Mary. So it's kind of key to mention Mary as a new Rachel because it also describes her role. That if Rachel is the mother of all the Jews, then Mary is the mother of the church. In fact, Jeremiah 31 describes her as the mother of all the Jews. So ancient fathers of the church would since they called Rachel, the Jews called Rachel the mother of the people, the ancient early Christians called Mary the mother of the church. So, does that make sense? So, Mary's not the mother of the church because she just happens to be the biological mother of Mary. She's mother of the church because she willingly consented to share in the sufferings of Christ on the cross. And Rachel's role, her key role as mother, was intercessor. So Mary is the new Rachel, and like Mary, she's an intercessor. We'd say just more powerful. In the book of Revelation, what are the saints doing in heaven? What are the saints doing in heaven besides partying? They're praying for us. It says that they have these golden incense bowls in their right hand. And that's their prayers for us before the presence of God. And then at one point, I just like it because it's a dramatic, symbolic thing. This angel comes along and collects the prayers of the saints and puts them in a censer and wings it up and throws it to the earth. And when it hits the earth, there's this earthquake and thunder and crack and everything rumbles. It's just this huge demonstration that the prayers of those who have died powerfully affect us on earth. That's all that description means. Does that make sense? So, if the saints are praying for us, and the person with the most powerful prayers in Judaism is Rachel, who has the most powerful intercessory prayers of all the saints? Do you see how, like, we'd say, well, that's our role. Or that's her role. Like, Protestants like just to kind of picture that she just happens to be the woman who was the mother of Jesus. We'd say, no, that's way too small. She's the mother of all the church, and her prayers are the most powerful. And then you get into the adoption of Mary. And so on the cross, remember, Christ legally bequeaths all his possessions away. And Jesus only has one possession left on the cross. And what is it? His mother. No, he was naked. I know we put a little loincloth on him just to, but he doesn't have any clothes. He dies in absolute poverty, which, just going off, I love that for me. When I was a little kid, I saw this black and white picture. I read this book on Gandhi, and it had a picture of all his worldly possessions that you could literally fit inside a little box. And I remember thinking, I want to die like that. I want to die with having given everything away. And his final act of giving something away was his mother. From the cross, Jesus legally bequeaths Mary to us. His last will and testament are the sacraments, but also his very last one is his mother. And adoptions, and that little phrase that he's using, behold your mother, behold your son, that's a legal adoption. A mother who dies without a son has no welfare to take care of her. So that was considered the worst fate, is for a mother to lose a son, because they didn't have Social Security. So what would happen if you were a widow is that legally a son is obligated to take care of you. So if you remember back in the Gospels, Jesus comes upon the city, and at the city gates, the son is being taken out in a funeral procession, and the mother's crying, and Jesus sees this, because the worst pain is to lose a child. Jesus sees this and starts to cry. And what does he do? He raises the son, he resuscitates the son. He was moved because maybe he knew his own mother would feel that same exact pain. And without a son, a mother has no welfare system. So he's dying. He's her only true son. And so what does he do? He legally adopts Mary to the church. So the beloved disciple is legally now Mary's son. And as I said, adoptions like that, Josephus writes about it, adoptions were considered as strong as blood relatives. They're not two separate ones. Joseph adopts Jesus. So Jesus says, behold your son, behold your mother, as he's literally dying. And so in English, when it says that the beloved took Mary, sometimes you'll read this. In English, you'll say, he took Mary into his home. Technically, that's not what the Greek says. What the Greek says is the beloved took her as one's own, as his own mother. Does that make sense? So into your home sounds like he's just offering her a retirement benefit. He's getting her bequeathed and take her own as his own mother. So at the cross, Mary is made our mother. I just like his last concern was for his mother. The last thing he did before he dies is adopt his mother. We are legally her children according to Jewish law. By this act, a new family is formed. We're the children of Mary's labor pains at the cross. And only after he's adopted his mother does he say, it is finished. I think that's incredibly beautiful. So I really think we should pray the scripture, that we take Mary as our own. May the cross of Christ make all of us see each other as brothers and sisters. That's the effect. I think we should pray that other Christians, that they do take Mary as their own mother. If Christ obeyed all 10 commandments, it does say that one should honor the mother and father. If Christ made Mary our mother, shouldn't we obey the commandment and honor our mother? So not only do they call her mother of the church, but the early Christians also called her mother of all the living. Now, if you remember, that's the name of Eve inside the garden. Inside the garden, she was called the mother of all living. In the book of Revelation, the woman with many children, the woman clothed with a son, she is called this hint of the title of Mary, mother of all the living. So we'd say, yes, Mary is the mother of the church. And what father would be happy if his child only loved his father? Doesn't God want us to live as brothers and sisters, even with those in heaven? Shouldn't we love our brothers and sisters? Shouldn't, like any father would want the children to love their mother? Wouldn't God, our Father, want us to love our mother? So I know this sounds strange. I do pray that I can love Mary the same way Christ loved her. And also ask those who don't love Mary that they can love Mary the same way Christ loves it. Who can argue with that? So in this class, Mary is not just the new Eve. She's not just the new ark. Mary is my mother and your mother. God's hope from the beginning of the Bible is he always wants a family. The family is broken apart in the Garden of Eden. And so he takes Abraham to start up this new family. God's hope from Abraham, Moses, David, is that humanity would become one family. So Mary is our mother. It's speaking about the hope of God right from the beginning, that we all become one family. And I read something I still don't understand it. I was looking up, it was about 3 months ago in this science journal. I still find this hard to believe, but I'm going to mention it. Did you know, according to this article, that a woman who gives birth to a child, she keeps a little bit of every child that she's given birth to, a little bit of that child's DNA in her own body? Isn't that weird? I don't see how that can be. But every child a woman has had, a little bit of that child's DNA lives in her body. That's a really weird concept. But then I started to think about it, and scientifically I think it's weird. But then theologically, does that mean a little bit of Christ's DNA remained in Mary's body? And if Mary is the mother of the church, that means the DNA of all the children of the church can only be found in the church. Does that make sense? So anyhow, I just like it. But my only point being is that in this class, if there's no Mary, there's no Christ. And with no Christ, there's no church. So the last point I'd like to make is that we should behold Mary as our mother. As Christ said, behold, Mary's not a doctrine. not even really a Bible study. She's a person to be in relationship with, a person who suffered intense pain, who lived with joy. She's our mother and intercessor. And beholding our mother doesn't take anything away from Jesus. That's what the Protestants like to think, that somehow if you honor Mary, you're making less of Christ. I would say, in fact, it deepens our relationship with Christ and other people. Why would you say you have a personal relationship with Jesus when he legally adopts Mary to us? Wouldn't that make a personal relationship between us and Mary as well? And everything the church teaches about Mary, it's really found in the Bible. Queen of Heaven, that's the book of Revelation. All that. So honoring Mary really honors the Word of God. And the last point I want to make is this. Mary as our most powerful intercessor. So when I was growing up, my mother used to say something that just caught me off guard. My mother said, you know, I loved you long before you even knew who I was. It's a great way to guilt your children. No, it really is. Because when she says, you know, my mother would say, I loved you long before you even knew who I was. I held you, I fell in love with you, you didn't even know who I was. You know, I've been part of your life long before you even knew who I was. And here's the odd part. Have you ever thought you could apply the same thing to Mary? The same way your mother gave you your first kiss, your mother was praying for you when you didn't even know what that object was. Mary's been praying for us long before we even knew who she was. She is our most powerful intercessor. So if you're going to follow the Ten Commandments, I'd say, this last part, I just want as a polemic against Protestants who say, oh, you guys worship Mary. No, we honor Mary. We keep the Ten Commandments. If Christ legally adopted her to us, then we must honor her. And like a mother, she's been praying for us long before we even knew who she was. So, questions, objections?
All right, so I have this miraculous medal, and on it, it's from 1830. And on it, it says that Mary will protect you if you have recourse to her. And I don't quite understand where that cuts. What does it mean, recourse to, if you have recourse to me, Mary?
So the same way, I think what it means is this. The same way Solomon said he won't deny his mother anything, Solomon's son David, I don't think Christ will deny his mother any of her prayers either. So if we ask, the same way like somebody asked Bathsheba to intercede, and she does, and it works.
But what if I give the medal to a Protestant? Does he have recourse to Mary?
I think everybody has recourse to Mary.
So why did she put it in there?
I think it's a way of saying that, I think the medal set is making the statement that she is our most powerful intercessor. The same way the Jews would say Rachel is our most powerful intercessor. That's what I think it really speaks to.
Because you take it one way and it's broadening, like erasing the differences between Protestants and Catholics. And taking it another way is it's asking Protestants to convert to Catholicism. That's why it's kind of an important item to me.
Well, I think she's wondering about the miraculous medal. What's the saying on the miraculous medal? But I think a lot of Protestants who's converted to Catholicism, they were taught anti-Mary theology. And once they become Catholic, they were like, why did I believe that? So you're right, it cuts both ways. So, yes. Oh, yeah.
Before coming here for the last 3 weeks, I had a really hard time with Mary as mother. I believe that she's elevated as she is, and I understand it now, but I tried to reason through it so many times, and one of the things that I came up with was that thought that in birth she had part of Christ still in her. And that was one of the main ways that able to try to believe her that this, everything exposed makes it totally different.
Hmm.
So it's almost like a converse thought process for non-Catholics.
I like that. Anybody else? I'm just kind of curious. It made me think what you were saying. Did this help anybody, this class, kind of understand our theology of Mary? Because she said she had a hard time before. Oh.
I think she's always been important to all of us, but you've given us more depth of knowing and being able to have that conversation with somebody who doesn't understand it.
Maybe about 15 minutes ago, I started to wonder, why is it that Protestants, have different stance about this? And then you explained that they believe it, takes away from devotion to Jesus or whatever. But in there, so what I'm thinking about is, so Luther didn't take all the verses in the Bible, and they did, he did something which affected that.
Okay, so only because I have to repeat everything you said. So he was wondering, now I forgot, why Protestants are anti-Mary, and then he was thinking, well, Luther did cut out parts of the Bible.
Yeah, my question was, did their church structure, or Luther, or some of the other Protestant leaders do things to downplay Mary?
Well, I don't know if Luther,
Or is it just a tradition?
Yeah, I don't know if Luther downplayed things to Mary, but I do know other Protestant leaders do downplay the role of Mary. I'm not sure about Luther. So. Yes?
Have you had a class, or will you in the future, I know another thing to your schedule, but about the apparitions of Mary's sense and what she has taught us since?
I know, I thought about that. I was thinking, should we have another class about the apparitions of Mary? Now, not this year, but every year I like to change it up with different books, different subjects, cut it from different ways. But yeah, I did think that would be an interesting one, the different apparitions of Mary. That would be Mary in the New Testament,
Will you give us
in the
little
post-New
things
Testament.
in Mass, like Our Lady of Good Counsel? Like, I don't know of Our Lady of Good Counsel. I know the Lords and things like that. So just there's been so many over the course of history.
Many.
How they weave together and what elements she.
They're all, yeah. That's a great idea.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't see you.
I know I'm so far back here.
Well, my eyesight kind of blurs when it gets back to you.
I can barely hear you all, so.
Oh,
So I always wore a medal that I got in Italy of Mary. I actually gave it away to somebody who became a Catholic about a year ago. I'd love to replace it, but I haven't yet. And when I wore it, my non-Catholic friends would say, why do you wear that? I understand why you wear a cross, but why do you wear that medal of Mary? So I was just looking up that word recourse. Recourse is someone you turn to and when you're in need and you're in a difficult situation. And so my response was always to people, we all suffer in life, whether it's with our kids, our marriage, whatever it might be, health issues. And I said, sometimes I could just hold that medal and I could concentrate on Mary's suffering. And it helped me through some really tough times.
see, I like that, yeah. I like that recourse.
That makes sense. I said, yeah, I'm not,
And also,
I'm not worshiping Mary,
yeah,
I am turning to her
a friend.
as a friend and a mother.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. Also, that's the role Rachel played hundreds of years later. Also, this sounds kind of strange, but my nephews, two of them, one's still in the military. They all went to the military. So they're kind of funny because they're all tall, except for one. One's only 6 foot. The other ones are 6'3", or anyhow. So they're kind of tall and they're military, but it is really funny because every time they got sick, they called their mother. And I know that sounds downgrading, but my sister said, a child always wants their mother, even when they're fully grown. If they're really suffering, they want their mother. I think you need somebody to have recourse to, is my only point being. And same way Rachel was, I think Mary is. That's a great story. All right, now we've got an hour, so let's see. Not going to do anything during Lent, kinda. So I am thinking about, I don't know if I have time, that's a problem, because Lent will be busy. But I'm thinking about doing an adult ed class on Thursdays, just in the morning, because that's the only time I have, on the Passion of Christ. Because there's so much symbolism in the Passion of Christ that I think just a lot of people miss because they weren't educated. Like the right hand of God. What does the right hand of God mean? It actually refers to the Lamb of God. Like there's just a lot of symbolism there. So I'll let you know on that. How's that? So.
But do you have time? I like what Mary said about doing the apparitions.
Yeah, I do want to do the apparitions, but not this year because I already.
You're so busy.
Yeah, I already have this year planned out. So. All right, so this sounds strange, but I think we should end with a Hail Mary that really that everybody can fall in love with Mary is really what I want to pray for. So, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our